Okay, this is my speech on the Fight for 15 movement, and here's my keyword outline. Imagine working a 138-hour work week. That is the work week required for a single parent of two children to make a living wage in the US while working for the federal minimum wage. To put that in perspective, there are only 168 hours in a week, meaning that you would need to spend 123% of your waking hours to fulfill that requirement. This is literally impossible. So, raising the minimum wage is necessary because current wages are immoral, and raising them would help reduce worker exploitation and ultimately would help bolster the economy. And hopefully, by the end of the speech, I will have cleared up any misconceptions for common arguments against raising the minimum wage. So, I'd like to start off by talking about the state of current wages in America, and then later I'll move on to talk about how raising wages would help them, and later we'll assess the effects on the economy from raising wages. So that first statistic may have been blown a little bit out of proportion because many states in the US already have a minimum wage that is set above the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. So if you look at this picture here, I know you can't really read it, but you can see the colors at least, and all the states in green have a minimum wage that is above the federal minimum wage. However, this doesn't make the current wages in the US any less cruel, and there's still desperate need for change. According to MIT's living wage calculator, the average living wage in the US is set just above $16 an hour. And looking at this chart, and also just from their data, not a single state in the US has a minimum wage that satisfies the living wage requirement. So this begs the question, how many workers in the US are actually working for less than a living wage? So I couldn't find exact data, but I did find some data that gives us a pretty good idea of what that number might be. And it's pretty striking. So a recent study done by Brookings Institute found that almost half of American workers work in low-wage jobs, this specific number being 44%. And furthermore, a majority of these workers are aged 25 through 54, meaning that they are working in these jobs for a living and they're dependent on the job for survival. Perhaps the most striking data point is that the median income of those 44% is set at 22 cents an hour, meaning that half of these workers are making less than that. And you may be wondering, okay, what does Brookings mean by low wage workers? And doing some simple math, it's actually pretty easy to find that uh, it's pretty synonymous with MIT's definition of the living wage. So here is a figure that shows the household income distribution in the US. And if you look to the left of the median income marker, you can see that the distribution is relatively flat. So given that the living wage is around $34,000 a year, and that the median individual income is $43,000 a year, since the income distribution is flat, we can quickly calculate the 44th percentile as around $38,000 a year, which is pretty darn close to the MIT's living wage definition. And I believe that other differences can be accounted for by variations from person to person of the threshold of living wage for each person. And basically, what that means is that, say you have a high population density in San Francisco. And so for all those people, the living wage for them is actually much higher than $16 an hour. It might be $20 an hour. So another point is that this is at no fault of the workers. A recent trend in the economy, or not really that recent, but an ongoing trend, is that the economy has been adding more jobs, but overall the quality of these jobs has been decreasing, meaning that we've just been seeing a rise in low wage jobs. As a result, another trend has been on the rise, which is the number of workers that are working for, or the number of workers in low wage jobs that have a college degree. Currently, that number sits at just under a quarter of all low wage workers, the highest of all time. So, okay, obviously wages need to be raised, but what if that just creates job losses that further hurt workers? This is true to a certain extent, but newer research shows that we don't really have to worry about this so much anymore. A 2016 study conducted by the Center on Wage and Employment Dynamics ultimately found that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour in New York would result in substantial benefits to low-wage workers and their families. In total, the study predicted an overall wage gains for low-wage workers of $14.43 billion. Even more surprising is the study actually predicted a slight increase in employment as a result of increasing the minimum wage, which is completely contrary to the common talking point and common concern that many people have over raising the minimum wage. So this study was done for New York, but the CWED actually conducted studies for other areas as well. And there's also a 2019 paper uh, by UC Berkeley's Institute for Research on Labor and Employment, and their conclusion states that we do not detect that minimum wages decrease employment or hours. Minimum wage increases do, however, reduce poverty rates among households and children. Again, it's interesting that we see multiple studies reaching the same conclusion that employment is not really something, or changes in employment is not something that we need to worry about when raising wages. What's important is that all these studies actually account for interstate heterogeneities. So in around 2010, there was a study that found an inaccuracy among many previous minimum wage studies. And basically, what the studies were doing was applying the same economic model to an entire state. But this is an inaccuracy because states actually have variations in policy and demographics among their counties. And they find that when you account for this, those previous studies that uh, had predicted negative employment outcomes, they found that those negative employment outcomes actually reduced once you accounted for this. And so new research is consistent. Okay, so obviously raising wages would probably be good for workers then, but what about the rest of the economy? And so the studies I previously mentioned uh, showed that, remember, unemployment rates don't really change all that much as a result of raising the minimum wage. So that concern for the economy is already out of the picture. And as a whole, raising the minimum wage is good for the economy. As previously mentioned, there will be some job losses as a result of raising the minimum wage, but these losses are offset by gains. But still, inside those losses, a lot of those jobs are replaced with automation. And automation is actually good for the economy because it is good for productivity. So you might be concerned about how businesses will be affected by the economy. And as it turns out, payroll costs won't be affected that much by increased minimum wages. So the same CWE study projected a 3.2% increase in payroll costs, which is pretty small. And this net payroll increase is uh, partially as a result of two reasons. The first is that workers that are paid well are generally happier and therefore more productive. And the second is that workers that are paid well are more likely to stay at their jobs, therefore reducing operating costs associated with turnover. And finally, you might be wondering about how this might affect you as a consumer. And what the data shows is that consumers aren't affected much by raising the minimum wage either. So the CWE study projected a total price increase of 0.7%. And this is largely because labor costs are actually a small portion of overall operating costs. So basically, as consumers, we don't really need to worry about inflation as a result of raising these wages either. Sorry, I'm just waiting. Oh, there it goes. So overall, the benefits of raising the minimum wage far outweigh the drawbacks. Given that a shocking number or portion of American workers work in low wage jobs, it would be cruel to keep wages the way that they are. Furthermore, common talking points for arguments against raising the minimum wage don't hold up to newer research. As a whole, I would condemn keeping wages the way that they are. Raising them would help reduce worker exploitation and also help the economy. So this is why that whenever possible, you as an American citizen should also be raising awareness for workers' rights and worker exploitation and low wages in America. And you should also be doing anything you can politically to help stop this. My biggest suggestion would be to vote differently. Anyways, thank you.